Welcome to Shadow of Truth. Cops discover truck full of dead bodies, vanishings in a small town. If real investigations and untold case files keep you hooked, hit subscribe. New chapters drop every week. Grants, New Mexico wears winter like a tired coat. Cold sunlight, long shadows, in streets where everyone knows enough to worry. When 21-year-old Matthew Miller stopped answering calls near the end of January, the silence didn't feel like a phase. It felt like a door closing. Detective Turney began the way experienced investigators always do, by listening. A grandmother steadying her voice, friends who'd seen Matthew around, familiar places to call first, hospitals, shelters, county lockups. The detective's tone stayed gentle, but the subtext wasn't. I'm very concerned. In towns like Grants, concerned is code for we might already be behind. Then two more names surfaced, not as rumors but as reports. Justin, a familiar face in Matthew's circle, and Jennifer, a young mother whose parents in New Jersey had been staring at a silent phone for weeks. No calls, no texts, nothing. 3 adults, 1 town. January turning into February like a page that wouldn't lie flat. Answers rarely arrive as arrows pointing due north. They drift in as contradictions. Someone says she hasn't seen Matthew since last year, but a camera later shows his truck outside her place last month. A fiancé left, then came back, then left again. A truck appears and reappears on grainy footage, parked like a stray thought that won't explain itself. When statements and timestamps don't rhyme, detectives start drawing circles. One circle kept overlapping. Sean, Jennifer's ex-husband, had just left the family home after an eviction. He was staying in Albuquerque with the kids and a family friend. He sat down with the detective and measured each answer. Yes, he'd seen Matthew. Yes, he'd driven Matthew's truck. Weeks prior, he said. Errands with the kids, nothing more. He'd heard Jennifer left with Justin and a third person known only by a nickname. He was worried. Everyone said they were worried, but cameras don't blink the way people do. On January 26th, a surveillance lens across from Sean's house captured a familiar figure step into Matthew's truck. Pause at the bed, then pull away. Later, the same truck surfaced at the Leach apartments and was left there, as if placed. When the detective circled back, the story shifted. Sean now said he'd parked it where he was told to and left the keys. That explanation hadn't appeared the first time. Other threads tugged loose. A tip about a bag stashed at a girlfriend's place. IDs inside, possibly a weapon. A phone, smashed. A carpet, cut out before the eviction. A name that floated at the edges. Danny, dog, on the street. Quick-tempered, the kind of reputation that makes neighbors lower their voices. Each new piece made the map messier, but all the lines, Matthew's truck, Justin's last sightings, Jennifer's silence, still ran through Sean. The detective's questions sharpened. Why the gaps? Why the parking spot? Why hide a bag? Why destroy a phone? Why tear up a carpet? Sean offered answers, and then different answers, and then the same answers said slower. He spoke of jealousy without admitting rage, of errands without explaining routes. He said he didn't know where Matthew was, or Jennifer, or Justin. You can debate words. It's harder to argue with the geometry of overlap. In 3 separate worlds, Matthew's, Jennifer's, and Justin's, Sean stood at the center, days stretched. An outstanding warrant let Albuquerque officers bring Sean back for more conversation. The detective laid out the collision between words and images. You said weeks. The video shows days. You said store. The truck was left at the apartments. He put it plainly, the way investigators do when patience meets evidence. Step 1 is to tell us where people are. Sean didn't. Pressure has a way of moving cases even when suspects don't. In early March, a red pickup rolled into the parking structure at Albuquerque International Sunport and settled into stillness. Airports are built on motion. Parked things disappear in the noise. For a while, nothing happened. Then, late the next night, routine turned into a report. Security noted an odd smell and belongings arranged in a way that didn't belong and called it in. Officers arrived before dawn because that's when hard truths tend to announce themselves. They circled the vehicle, careful, calm, methodical. Seasoned officers learned to trust their senses without rushing them. This wasn't routine anymore. It was something else. They didn't yet know how closely that something tied back to the missing persons board in Grants. They didn't yet know the truck itself would become the loudest piece of evidence, or that inside it were answers that would uproot several families' lives. They only knew it couldn't be ignored. Back in Grants, the detective pushed forward. He canvassed, re-interviewed, re-watched clips that had already been watched. He dialed numbers that didn't ring and re-asked questions that had already been answered, listening for the one word that breaks a locked door. In New Jersey, a mother checked her phone every hour, then every few minutes, training her ear to hear a message that wasn't coming. Jennifer's children stayed with family. Matthew's truck had been found. Justin's routes were mapped. The lines kept ending at the same name. There is a moment in every major case when a story stops being missing and starts being something else. In those early hours at the airport garage, that moment arrived. The call went up. Investigators were summoned. Through concrete echoes and fluorescent hum, a small-town case stepped into a larger light. What would follow would push the investigation from rumor to record, from suspicion to something that holds up in court. Names would harden into timelines, conversations would become transcripts, and the person standing at the center of all three circles would have far more to explain than conflicting dates. For now, the detective held to the first rule in cases like this: gather quietly, verify relentlessly, and let the evidence speak before anyone else does. Because cases don't break on hunch alone. They break when one undeniable fact touches another, and the picture finally comes into focus. The discovery that changed everything. March 5th began like any other shift for the Albuquerque International Sunport security team. Quiet, methodical, predictable. The night air was cool, the garage half lit by humming fluorescent bulbs, echoing with the low rumble of tires from travelers heading home. But on the third level of that garage sat something that didn't belong. A red Ford pickup, unmoving, unnoticed, and strangely out of place. It had been there for more than a day. Security officers first logged it as suspicious because of its odd parking angle. The front wheels turned sharply toward the wall, as if the driver had stopped mid-thought. When they approached, a faint odor hung in the air, one that didn't match oil, gasoline, or food left too long in the heat. One officer leaned close, squinting through the window. Piles of plastic bins and tarps filled the truck bed, stacked with care. At first glance, it might have looked like camping gear, but something about the arrangement was too deliberate. They called it in. Within the hour, the Albuquerque Police Department arrived. Officers taped off the surrounding spaces, their voices echoing softly between concrete pillars. This wasn't a routine abandoned vehicle anymore. It was evidence. As the team approached, they noted details: the plates, the VIN, the registration. The truck belonged to a man named Randall Apostolon. No active warrants, no alerts, just another name that, until that moment, no one had connected to Grants, New Mexico. When they lifted the first tarp, the night shifted. What they found inside those containers would become one of the most haunting discoveries in the state's history. The garage, a place of departures and arrivals, had become a silent crime scene. Detectives from Grants were called immediately. For days they'd been chasing ghosts. 3 names, 3 families, and a single suspect who kept giving half answers. Now, suddenly, everything was converging. The red pickup in Albuquerque was the same one seen parked outside Sean's old residence. The same one that surveillance footage had captured, being driven by him weeks earlier. Detective Turney didn't say much when the call came in. He just nodded, grabbed his jacket, and began the drive north. Cases like this have moments that divide time, before the call and after it. Before, you're searching. After, you're documenting. At the scene, technicians worked carefully, photographing, logging, preserving. The truck was sealed for transport. Reporters began to gather outside the airport, drawn by scanners and whispers. A police spokesperson confirmed only that a suspicious vehicle was discovered and multiple remains were recovered. But word spread fast, faster than any press release could control. By morning, the case that had started as 3 missing adults in a quiet New Mexico town had turned into something far darker. When the truck's contents were cataloged and processed, the victims were identified: Jennifer Lannon, Justin Mata, Matthew Miller. 3 lives now found together. The same 3 names that had been written on whiteboards for weeks in the Grants PD conference room. Detective Turney stood in that same room hours later, staring at the board, tracing the red lines between names and dates. The center still held one name: Sean Lannon. The interrogation that followed, when Sean was taken back into custody, there was no small talk. The detective laid the evidence out plainly: the truck, the footage, the timelines. "Step one," he said again, "is to tell me where the bodies are." But now, they didn't have to ask that question anymore. Instead, they asked why. Sean shifted between calm and trembling, between detachment and sudden emotion. His story bent under its own contradictions: jealousy, fear, resentment, addiction. He spoke of betrayal and revenge. He mentioned names that no one had heard before. He said things that didn't fit any logical sequence, but the evidence didn't need his narrative anymore. It spoke for itself. As detectives built their case, new details surfaced. Surveillance footage from the airport showed a man, short hair, medium build, wearing a dark jacket, walking calmly from the red truck, down an elevator, and out toward the taxi zone. The timestamp matched the night before the call to security. Investigators froze the image and stared. There was no doubt. It was Sean. He had left the truck, and everything inside it, and vanished into the crowd. A story unraveling across states hours after the discovery, new information came in from across the country. Records showed that Sean and his 3 children had bore, dead a flight to New Jersey less than 12 hours before the truck was first reported. He was already gone, thousands of miles away, staying with his mother in Gloucester County. Detectives in New Mexico worked around the clock to connect with law enforcement in New Jersey. The goal wasn't just to arrest him, it was to protect the children. They coordinated quietly, watching, waiting for a moment when he'd be separated from them. But what no one could predict was that even across state lines, the case would continue to escalate, and the death toll was not finished rising. Back in Albuquerque, media vans lined the street near the airport. Reporters used phrases like gruesome discovery and multi-state homicide investigation. But inside the Grants precinct, the tone was different. It wasn't sensational, it was heavy. Detectives didn't celebrate closure. They felt the weight of what came next. For every body found, there were new questions, and none had answers yet. Who was Randall Apostolon? The truck's owner? How had his vehicle ended up tied to 3 other missing people? And if Sean had already fled, what else was he capable of? As dawn broke over New Mexico, the story was no longer confined to one town. It was spreading across newsrooms, state lines, and time zones. What started as 3 quiet disappearances was now a full-scale investigation, spanning 2 states, multiple victims, and one man whose calm explanations couldn't mask the chaos left behind. The search wasn't over. In fact, it was only about to get darker. The confession and the 11 others. When detectives finally had Sean Lannon back in an interview room, the tone was different. The questions were no longer about where or who, they were about why. And for the first time, Sean seemed ready to talk. He sat quietly, hands clasped, his voice calm, almost detached. What began as a statement about mistakes spiraled into something much darker. He spoke about Jennifer, his ex-wife, and how their relationship had collapsed under jealousy, drugs, and regret. But what he described next made the entire room still. He claimed that one night, returning home, he found his children unresponsive and blamed Jennifer and Justin for it. He said rage and grief overtook him, that what followed wasn't planned but a reaction. Detectives listened, trying to separate truth from self-justification. Sean's version shifted each time, but one thing never changed. Jennifer was gone, Justin was gone, and not long after, so was Matthew. He admitted that he didn't call for help. Instead, he concealed what had happened, keeping the victims in containers, moving them from house to house. When asked why, he looked down and said softly, "You do what you have to do." The detectives didn't answer. Silence filled the room, louder than any question. The red truck. Sean explained that the red Ford Ranger, the same truck found in the airport parking structure, belonged to a man named Randall Apostolon, someone he'd recently met. He claimed Randall had been helping him move the containers but became a threat. When pressed, Sean admitted what investigators already suspected. Randall had been killed too. His tone never changed, as though he were describing a repair gone wrong. "It was him or me," he said simply. He described cleaning the truck, sealing it with tarps, and driving to the airport, the same one caught on surveillance video. He parked it, walked away, and boarded a plane to New Jersey with his 3 children. 12 hours later, airport security would find the vehicle and everything inside. The 6th victim. Police thought the nightmare had ended in New Mexico. Then came a call from across the country, a welfare check in East Greenwich Township, New Jersey. Officers entered the home of Michael Dubkowski, a 66-year-old man who hadn't been answering his phone. Inside, they found him dead. Neighbors later described Michael as a mentor from a Big Brother program Sean had joined as a child. But in his confession, Sean claimed something different, that Michael had hurt him long ago and that this act was revenge. Whether true or not, no evidence ever proved it. What was certain was that 5 people were dead across 2 states, and the same man was responsible. There are more. Just when detectives thought the case had reached its end, Sean leaned forward and whispered, "There are more. 11 more." He said he'd hidden them near the El Malpais lava tubes, a maze of volcanic caves outside Grants, New Mexico. He claimed they were people who came after Jennifer, people he had to protect her from. Search teams scoured the area, but no evidence was ever found. No remains, no missing persons, no signs of anyone else. Some believed Sean was exaggerating to gain control of the narrative. Others feared he was telling the truth and the land had already swallowed it. Even now, no one knows for sure. The verdict. Eventually, the courtroom replaced the interrogation room. Sean pleaded guilty to 5 murders across 2 states, 4 in New Mexico and 1 in New Jersey. He received 95 years in prison with no chance of parole. 5 years for the killing in New Jersey, followed by 60 more for those in New Mexico. In court, he apologized faintly. "I'm sorry for destroying lives, especially my kids." But the families didn't believe him. Jennifer's children were adopted by her brother. Her parents still refused to say his name. Detective Turney, the man who followed every lead from day one, would later describe the moment the truth sank in. "It wasn't the evidence that broke me," he said. "It was the silence after he stopped talking." Even today, no trace of the 11 others has been found. The story ends in prison, but its echoes stretch far beyond. A mother's unanswered calls, a detective's sleepless nights, a community that still whispers whenever a truck sits parked too long, and the question that lingers like an echo through the New Mexico desert. What gave him the right? If this case left you speechless, there are more like it. Real stories, real investigations, no dramatization, just truth. Subscribe now, drop a like, and turn on the bell, because next time the story might start in a town just like yours.